I used to think Live and Let Die was just a movie where James Bond suddenly became cooler, funkier, and a little stranger. But the more I looked behind it, the more it felt like a Bond film made during an identity crisis. A new actor, a new sound, a new cultural mood, and stunts so dangerous, they almost feel impossible today. This was not just another 007 mission. This was the moment Bond put on a new mask. In 1973, Live and Let Die had one of the hardest jobs in franchise history. It had to prove that James Bond could survive without Sean Connery, and somehow it did that by changing almost everything around him. The music became louder, the world became darker, the action became more reckless, and the movie gave us one of the strangest endings in the entire Bond series. From a rock song that broke tradition, to a real alligator stunt that nearly went wrong, to a villain who may not have died at all. These are 7 weird facts behind Live and Let Die. Before Live and Let Die, James Bond still belonged to Sean Connery in the public imagination. Connery had made Bond dangerous, elegant, and masculine in a way audiences had never seen before. So when Roger Moore stepped into the role, he was not just replacing an actor, he was replacing a myth, and that pressure was enormous. Moore was already famous from TV, especially from The Saint, but Bond was different. This was global. This was sacred territory for movie fans. Several other names had been considered before him. Timothy Dalton was approached, but he felt he was too young at the time. Other actors were tested, but finally the producers landed on Moore. And here is the surprising part. Roger Moore was already 45 when filming began, making him the oldest actor to debut as Bond at that point. He knew the audience might reject him, so instead of copying Connery, he did the smartest thing possible. He made Bond lighter, smoother, more amused by danger. Connery's Bond could feel like a predator. Moore's Bond felt like a man who knew the world was absurd and decided to raise one eyebrow at it. That one decision saved him, because Live and Let Die was not trying to pretend nothing had changed. It was telling the audience immediately, this is a different Bond now. Before this film, Bond themes usually followed a very specific pattern. Big orchestra, dramatic vocals, elegant danger, old-school glamour. Then Live and Let Die came along and handed the title song to Paul McCartney and Wings. That decision changed the entire musical identity of Bond. This was not a traditional torch song. It was rock. It was explosive. It had sudden shifts, quiet tension, and then a huge burst of energy. For a franchise that loved tuxedos, casinos, and velvet danger, this song felt almost rebellious, and it worked. The song became one of the most famous Bond themes ever recorded. It was even nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. That nomination mattered, because it proved that Bond music did not have to stay locked in the 1960s. It could evolve. It could absorb popular music. It could move with the culture. And behind the scenes, there was another fascinating connection. The film's score was composed by George Martin, the legendary Beatles producer. So in a strange way, Live and Let Die did not just bring James Bond into the Roger Moore era. It brought a piece of Beatles history into the Bond universe. From that point forward, Bond songs were no longer just introductions. They became events. Watching Live and Let Die today, one thing is impossible to ignore. This Bond film was heavily influenced by the blaxploitation movement of the early 1970s. At that time, films like Shaft and Superfly had changed American pop culture. They brought black characters, urban crime stories, funk music, street style, and new energy into mainstream cinema. The Bond producers noticed, so Live and Let Die moved large parts of its story into Harlem, New Orleans, and the Louisiana Bayou. The film filled its world with crime bosses, soul and funk influences, voodoo imagery, and a much more street-level atmosphere than earlier Bond films. But this choice was complicated. On one side, it made Bond feel current. The movie had a different texture. It felt more alive to the cultural moment. On the other side, it also carried stereotypes that are much more obvious today. That tension was not lost on Yaphet Kotto, who played Kananga. Kotto was a serious dramatic actor, and he reportedly had concerns about how the villain and the film's racial dynamics would be handled. And that makes his performance even more interesting, because he does not play Kananga like a cartoon. He gives him intelligence, control, presence. Even when the movie around him becomes wild, Kotto keeps the villain grounded. That is why Kananga remains one of the more underrated Bond villains. The film around him is messy, stylish, strange, and very 1973. But his performance gives it weight. Jane Seymour was only 22 when she played Solitaire, and somehow she gives the character a quality that is very difficult to fake. She feels innocent, mysterious, and slightly unreal. Solitaire is not just another Bond girl, she is a tarot reader who appears to have genuine supernatural power that instantly makes her different from many women in the franchise before her. To prepare for the role, Seymour studied tarot symbolism so the performance would feel more authentic. But the strangest part is what happened to the tarot cards themselves. The production did not just grab a normal deck from a shop. They commissioned a special tarot deck for the movie, designed by artist Fergus Hall. The cards had a dark, surreal, almost dreamlike look. They matched the atmosphere of the film perfectly, and then something unusual happened. The deck became popular outside the movie. It was commercially released, collected by Bond fans, and used by tarot enthusiasts. Decades later, the James Bond 007 tarot deck remained one of the most unusual pieces of Bond merchandise ever connected to the franchise. That is what makes this detail so fascinating. Most props disappear after a film ends. This one escaped the film. It became its own object, with its own life. A fake mystical tool from a James Bond movie somehow became a real cultural artifact. The Louisiana boat chase is one of the great action sequences of the Roger Moore era. It is long, loud, ridiculous, and full of practical chaos. And behind the scenes, it was even crazier. The production reportedly destroyed 26 boats while filming the sequence, not one or two, 26. The crew had to coordinate stunt drivers, camera boats, local waterways, timing, safety, and unpredictable bayou conditions. And inside that chaos came one of the most famous stunts in Bond history. Stunt driver Jerry Camore performed a speedboat jump that launched across land, cleared a road, and flew over a police car. The jump traveled around 110 feet through the air and was recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records. No CGI, no digital cleanup, no fake physics, just a real person in a real boat taking a real risk. That is why the sequence still works today. You can feel the danger because the danger was actually there, and the movie adds one more strange ingredient: Sheriff J.W. Pepper. He is loud, confused, over the top, and somehow unforgettable. The character is so absurd that he almost should not work. But audiences loved him enough that the producers brought him back in the next film. Only in the Roger Moore era could a massive Bond action sequence combine record-breaking stunt work, destroyed boats, and a comic Louisiana sheriff shouting through the chaos. And somehow it all becomes part of the charm. Most Bond villains die clearly. They fall, they explode, they get crushed, shot, drowned, or thrown into some impossible machine. But Baron Samedi is different. Played by Geoffrey Holder, he feels like he belongs to another kind of movie. He is theatrical, he is funny, he is frightening, and he seems almost supernatural. Holder was not just an actor in the film, he was also a dancer, choreographer, painter, and performer with an enormous presence. He brought movement and rhythm to the voodoo ceremony scenes, and his laugh became one of the most memorable sounds in the entire movie. But the weirdest part comes at the end. Bond appears to defeat Baron Samedi during the climax. So logically the character should be gone. Then, in the final shot, he appears on the front of the train alive and laughing directly at the audience. The film never explains it. Was he actually supernatural? Was it a joke? Was he a symbol? Or was Bond's world suddenly admitting that some things cannot be solved with a gun and a clever line? That final image is strange because it does not feel like normal Bond logic. It feels like myth. For a franchise built on gadgets, villains, and missions, Live and Let Die ends with a mystery it refuses to close. And that is why Baron Samedi still lingers. He does not just survive the movie, he haunts it. And now we get to the wildest fact. The villain Kananga was named after a real man, Ross Kananga. He owned the alligator farm in Jamaica where part of the film was shot. And when the movie needed a character to run across the backs of live alligators, the stunt was considered too dangerous. Professional stuntmen reportedly did not want to do it, so Ross Kananga volunteered. Think about that for a second. This was not a controlled digital effect. These were real alligators, real water, real jaws, and a real man trying to sprint across their backs. It took multiple attempts. On some takes, the timing failed. On others, the animals moved unpredictably. The danger was not theoretical. It was happening right there in the water. Then came the final attempt. One of the alligators snapped at Kananga and caught his shoe, but he kept moving, pulled himself free, and made it across. That footage went into the film. It is one of those scenes that looks impossible because, in a way, it almost was, and as a strange form of tribute, the filmmakers gave his name to the movie's main villain. That means one of Bond's most memorable enemies is named after a man who risked his body for one of the franchise's most dangerous practical stunts. It is bizarre, it is reckless, and it is exactly the kind of behind-the-scenes story that makes Live and Let Die feel larger than the film itself. Live and Let Die was not a perfect Bond film, but it was a necessary one. It proved that James Bond could change faces and still survive. It gave Roger Moore his own identity. It gave Bond one of its greatest songs. It brought funk, voodoo, bayou chaos, tarot cards, wild stunts, and supernatural mystery into a franchise that had been built on Cold War elegance. Some parts of it feel dated today, some parts feel strange. But that is also why the movie remains so fascinating. It is James Bond in transition, a franchise stepping out of the Connery shadow and walking into a louder, weirder, riskier decade. So now I want to know, which Roger Moore Bond film should we unmask next? The Man with the Golden Gun, The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy hidden movie stories, weird production secrets, and the strange details behind classic films, subscribe to Cinema Unmasked, because every movie has a mask, and we are here to take it off.